In this episode of Greetings and Felicitations, I visit with author Paul Aramouni, a hearing-impaired mystery writer, about his first novel and sign language and the power that it can bring to the hearing-impaired. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. Welcome back for another episode, and we're going to really take things in a little bit different direction today. I have with me Paul Aramouni. Paul, first of all, welcome and thank you for taking the time to visit with me today.
Thank you. I really appreciate being on this podcast.
So Paul has written his first novel. I'm 65 almost, and I've never written a novel, so hats off. But then he contacted me and asked me if he could come on my podcast and talk about the novel. And then I did a little more research into Paul's background and found out he's got a really great story to tell. So Paul, first of all, if we could start with, where did you grow up?
So I was born and raised in Florida, but I'm essentially Mexican and Lebanese. Yeah.
Mexican Lebanese. Well, I'm from Texas, so we've got a lot of Mexicans, but we don't have a lot of Lebanese. Well, that's not true. We do have a lot of Lebanese, but we don't have too many mixes. So I think you're the first Mexican Lebanese I've interviewed. But the other part of your story that's important for our audience to understand is your hearing. So could you tell us about, I'm not sure what the right question is, your hearing status? How much do you hear? Or do you have a hearing disability?
So I was actually born hard of hearing, and as far as I know, a lot of people that are born hard of hearing or fully hearing impaired, they do not have the proper speech level, so they have to go to speech pathology, speech therapy. Fortunately enough, I was already proficient with my speech level, so I didn't have to go to speech class. But yeah, also there are, when I was, I guess you could say, diagnosed, or when I got that disability, when I was younger, I went to a program in elementary school called the DHH, which is Deaf and Hard of Hearing program, and there would be deaf kids and hard of hearing kids, and everyone was different. Some people would need more help with their accommodations than others. I got equal help. There was more help for me if needed, but I wasn't as qualified to get the help that other people needed, because I was blessed enough to be more proficient in my with my speech and etc. But everybody learned sign language. I've been signing since half of my childhood life, from kindergarten all the way to like 12th grade. I don't do sign language as much anymore because everyone just parted ways after they graduated, and yeah. So yeah.
So Paul, for those who don't know, could you tell us what American Sign Language is, how you learned it, and how you're helping to teach others that skill?
So sign language is a non-verbal language based on hand signs. A lot of universal signs come into it as well. A lot of hearing people, they've basically been doing sign language their whole life. They just don't notice, like when you're pointing or when you say hi, bye. Those are universal signs that correlate to ASL. ASL is pretty similar, just obviously a more in-depth language. One of the cool things about being hearing impaired is that if you don't know sign language, there's always reading lips. Everybody, deaf, the hearing impaired people are much more verbal with lip reading than other hearing people are, because hearing people are more reliable on their voice, on their speech, versus deaf people, since they can't hear, they enunciate. lip sync, and that's how most deaf people are able to communicate through sign language and lip reading. The cool thing about me growing up is that people thought it was really cool how I can read lips, because I would be able to not, like for example, we're in the cafeteria, it's very loud and I can barely hear you, but although you are like you can be right in front of me, less than 2 feet away from me, or you could be 20 feet away from me, but if you're lip reading, I can always understand you. And that's how, like there would be times when one of my friends would be on the other side of the food court, and they would be like, do you want anything? Like, do you want any sauce or whatever? And I would just understand it, and then I would enunciate back to them. Well, unfortunately enough, a lot of them would understand, but a lot of people don't. But I think that's a really cool feature to have about me. It's like a superpower in a way. So it's really cool.
So, Paul, let's turn to your book, The Truth of the Unknown Interpreter. First of all, could you tell us what the book is about?
So the book is called The Truth of the Unknown Interpreter. So in my short summary, without reading the back of it, it's about a boy who moved from one country to another to run away from his problems. He later refaces them and ends up in a murder mystery. Obviously, it's a fictional story, but yeah.
So, is the boy hearing impaired?
The boy is hearing impaired. So the inspiration of this story is, okay, so the boy moved from one country to another. He was originated from Russia, and he moved to Oregon. So in my case, as I've stated earlier, that I was born hard of hearing, and I went to assigned deaf and hard of hearing schools, like assigned schools that have that program for elementary school. All of my elementary school I went through that. All of my middle school I went through that. There's been a lot of ups and downs with the people that I talked with, especially the interpreters, sign language interpreters. So I had some good ones and I had some bad ones. And when it got to 8th grade, I was at the point where I was like, I think I want to go to a fully hearing school. I don't want to go to an assigned school that I'm supposed to go to. So a lot of people were very skeptical about that. They didn't want me to go to a hearing school, but at the end of the day, it was my choice. But my mom, my parents, they agreed with it. They supported me every step of the way. So I went to First Hill High School, which is located in West Palm Beach. I went to that school. So yes, it was a hearing school. I was so excited to start my journey as a much more hearing environment. But unfortunately, you have contracts and records that follow you wherever you go. So I have this thing called the IEP, which is a contract for people with disabilities and whatnot. That followed me. So in the beginning of the day, when I started class, when I started school, I had a really fun moment seeing all the hearing kids and seeing all the groups and this and that. So it was really cool. I was so happy until I got to my first class, and then just minding my own business, setting up, getting my stuff ready, and then sadly, I saw a lady. She was the last person to come in. A lady with a black business suit. She had a briefcase and everything. And then she went to the teacher, and I was like, oh no. And she was like, I'm here for Paul Aramouni. It was like the whole world just went silent. But it turns out that she was the best interpreter ever. I really enjoyed her company. We had so many great conversations, and I said she was like the first best friend that I made in high school. So fast forwarding to a year later, in the beginning of sophomore year, first few days were really great, and then later, unfortunately, she gave me some pretty sad news. She had to go to this other client, an Italian client who was hearing impaired and needed her specialty more than I did. I just didn't understand why they couldn't just give him another interpreter. But I guess she was just one of the best ones that there is for him. So it was like, oh, okay. And then she was telling me how there's another interpreter coming. She's one of the best ones. She'll be there for you. It's like, okay. So when this another interpreter comes in, she was a shorter lady with a black business suit. She kind of looked intimidating, and I did not have a very comfortable feeling about this person. And so this is the light, and this is darkness. So when light and dark is like together, you're like neutral. But then when the light goes away, so when my favorite interpreter goes away, and as soon as she left that door, I just felt that earring vibe, and everything just felt like uncomfortable. 3 years later, we did not have a great chemistry. She was like very authoritative, very bossy. Yeah, she did do her job, but she was like a cop, a mom, an interpreter altogether, just not the best. So as I got to 11th grade, in the middle of 11th grade, I got more infuriated with her, because not only would she be authoritative to me, but she would go after my friends, after people in class that I would talk to. I guess you could say she was a total quote-unquote Karen to other people. She was the best friends with teachers that I didn't really like. She would turn my favorite teachers into my enemy. I did not like that. So later, towards 11th grade, I tried so hard, so many ways to try to get rid of her, like get her away from my life. The first thing I did was I tried to contact other interpreters to see if they can replace her. That didn't work. I tried to talk to the principal at first. That didn't really work. They tried talking with her. Didn't really work. I did something a bit more I guess more out of my comfort zone, which I made a petition of 500 signatures to try to get rid of my interpreter. That worked. A lot of students in the cafeteria were just like, oh yeah, sure, I'll just sign it. They even knew who my interpreter was. They were like, oh, I want to get rid of this person too. I submitted to the principal. The principal did not like that. She said that it was illegal or something like that. I was like, oh, sorry. So when the principal didn't like it, I emailed the superintendent of the school board. He didn't do much. He just forwarded the message to my principal, which was, I felt embarrassed because I thought the superintendent would just be like, oh, okay, I'll just put the stamp for you. And then the principal was like, why would you do that? You shouldn't have done that. And at one point, my interpreter, she said, I have 13 years of experience with the school board. There's no way you're going to get rid of me this easily. She said it in a much aggressive tone. It was like very scary. It was like, sheesh, crazy. So after all those series of events, and there was no way anyone could help me, so I just had all this bottled up anger. Every day before school, in lunch break, and after school, I would go to the library, just start throwing in a bunch of ideas, writing on the computer for like 2 hours at the most, just writing and writing and writing and writing, and I would ask my friends for help. And that's how I came up with a beautiful storyline, a fictional storyline about interpreters and hearing impaired and mystery, and that's how I, made a work of art, and I thought it was really inspiring.
So when did you graduate from high school? What year?
2018. 2018. It actually took me 7 months to write this book.
When was the book published?
2022. I actually had a hardcover copy that was already published in 2020, but then I made a paperback version with a different publisher in 2022. Yeah. This is the much more...
So, show us the book.
Yeah, this is the book, the much more enhanced, better version. Yeah.
So we're going to link to the book in our show notes, so hopefully our listeners will check it out. But you are also a social media influencer and entrepreneur. So could
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit about that part of your life?
Yeah, sure. So how it came about, how I wanted my journey to be in the social media industry and entrepreneurial industry is that, so before high school I've always wanted to be an electrical engineer because two of my uncles, they were electrical engineers, and they seemed really successful. They made a lot of money. They have a beautiful house and pool and everything, that American dream, I guess you could say. So that's what I wanted to do. I was inspired. So this high school that I told you about, how there were assigned high school that I had to go to. So not only was I looking for a different high school with people from the hearing environment, but I was also looking for electrical engineering programs. Fortunately enough, this high school that I went to has two things that I wanted: much more hearing environment and the electrical engineering program. Fortunately enough, I got accepted to it, and 2 years into this electrical engineering program, I had a lot of fun. It was really interesting. The robotics club, we made lots of robots and bridges through programs, and everything was really cool. I was also in the ROTC program as one of my electives. I was also in the swim team. So the JROTC, they have their own fundraising for DLJ, which is essentially an event where at the end of the school year, all of the companies like Delta, I forgot the other ones, like Charlie, those Army companies, they would all go in together and have a fun field day at the end of the school year with like food, sports, and etc. So we had to raise money for that. So essentially we did fundraising, or we sold candy. I was reluctant to do that because I didn't really like talking to people much. I was pretty antisocial. I got a little bit social over the years. So later, towards the end of the fundraising event, I decided to give it a try, because the money was also for the swim team. There was two different fundraisers. So I gave it a try. I had like a box of 150 candies. It's a lot, especially to a very antisocial person. You have to sell 150 candies. But fortunately enough, I knew people, and I just forced myself to go out there and talk to people. And and after 3 days, I sold all 150 candies, and that was really fun. The most memorable, most enjoyable part was the cash that I had earned for the fundraising, and I just never realized you could make this much money, because you know how when you're a teenager, you don't know how much money, like $20 is a lot, but $100, that's just, you're basically a millionaire when you're a teenager. After that feeling that I had, that journey that I had talking to people, getting together and making money, I just thought that was really exciting. So at the end of the day, after I had given the box back to the instructor, I remember going home that day, and I went to my car where my mom had picked me up, and I told her, I think I want to go. Well, I told her that it was really fun making this amount of money from selling candy and etc. And then she said, well, why don't we go to Costco and we can give you a small box of candy and you could try selling it on your own. I was like, oh, that's pretty interesting. So I did that. I started from one tiny box, and then by the end of my junior year, I managed to sell over 600 to 1,000 pieces of candy. That's how crazy I was. I had my own team. I had 3 people, and we would just go at it. So that's how I eventually got into the business. I eventually wanted to do online candy business. At the senior year, and I wanted to do make merch, clothing brand, and I've tried dropshipping before. I've published my book, try to get that out there. And the reason why I'm doing social media, trying to make YouTube videos, is because one, Yes, I'm social. I love talking to people, making content, making other people smile, and etc. But I plan on getting a large fan base so that I can not only have recognition but also, get my word out there from this book that I published. And I eventually want to go back to the candy business and make merch, and etc. Also, although I could make anything from scratch, at the end of the day, you need traffic. You need to market your word out there, and word of mouth is not really the easiest. That was more like in the 90s or earlier. We're in the 20s, and everything's through digital, so digital marketing is where it's at. And so that's why I want to make YouTube videos, TikTok, make content, and get the world out there.
So, do you have another book in you, or are you working on a new book?
So this book is just the first book that I've written. I've written the second book already. It's a prequel to the first book. So I've not published the second book yet. So this book is a prequel to the first book. So this book is about how the relationship that the protagonist had with the favorite interpreter for a short period of time, and it's about how the connection that they had, and then how the favorite interpreter just disappeared from the protagonist's life forever, and they're trying to find the favorite interpreter. And the second book that I wrote, that's a prequel to the first book. It's about the friendship, the fun journey that the protagonist had with the favorite interpreter, and yeah, so it's a really good one.
So, Paul, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to thank you for coming on the podcast and thank you for sharing your story. Before we leave, I wanted to ask you if anyone wanted more information on your book, on yourself, or any of the topics we've talked about on this podcast, what would be the best place for them to find more about you and your book?
So my book, The Truth of the Unknown Interpreter, it's on Amazon and it's on Barnes and Nobles. But you could totally type out the name of the book or just Paul Aramouni on Google. You'll be able to find all sorts of things to find my book, as well as my YouTube channel called Paul Vlogs with a V. So set up on YouTube, and I make all sorts of fun videos, and you guys can watch. And yeah.
Paul, we're going to link to all of those resources in our show notes. I hope you will let me know when you get your second book published, and perhaps you can come back on the podcast and talk to us about that book as well.
Perfect. Yeah, I totally look forward to showing my achievements in my book, and yeah. But thank you for everything, Doug.
Hope you've enjoyed this episode of Greetings and Felicitations, which are thoughts and commentary by myself, Tom Fox. Hope you'll join us again for our next episode. Greetings and Felicitations is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.